In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold. The Abracast. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
All right, welcome to the Abercast, everybody. I'm John Towers. On the line this evening, we have Ryan Merkle. Ryan Merkle is he's a champion basketball player, a rapper, and he's developed this comprehensive theory that proves intelligent design. You can find his work at the Quadrant Model of quadrantmodelofreality.com. Ryan, thank you very much for joining me this evening.
Thanks for having me, John.
All right. So before we get started, welcome aboard, by the way. Thank you for reaching out to me. Before we get started, I kind of have this question that I ask all of our first-time guests, and that is, were you raised in a religious environment?
First time I ever went to church, I think was my senior year of high school. And I went with my friend's basketball coach who was training my friend, and he trained me a little bit too, and he took me to a church. That was the first time I ever been to church. Before that, though, my first time ever kind of getting involved in anything spiritual was my freshman year of high school. I went to visit my grandpa who lived in Kauai, and I've been to Kauai before, but this was the first time I ever talked philosophically with my grandpa. And my grandpa just told me how he was a transpersonal psychologist, and he kind of taught me a little bit about what transpersonal psychology was. So apparently my grandpa, he learned under Dr. Hora, who was the founder of metapsychiatry. And basically what he taught was the transcending the ego, transcending dualistic consciousness. And he taught that there is no self. So it's what metapsychiatry is it's kind of a mixture of Buddhism and Christianity and Taoism. And so that was the first time I ever encountered anything really spiritual and discussed anything spiritual. Before that, pretty much nothing. And
okay.
Then,
yeah. No, sorry, go ahead.
And then in high school, around, I think it was the 11th grade, I was kicked out of my house because my dad and I had a little bit of conflict because of basketball. So I ended up, my grandpa came to Los Angeles from Kauai because I needed somewhere to live. So I went to live with my grandpa for a little bit, and then I went to live with my friend, one of my high school friends. But when I went to live with my grandpa, we talked philosophy too. And then, like I said, in college, I didn't say this yet, but in my senior year of high school, the first time I've been to church. And in college, a lot of my teammates, I went to play basketball at UC San Diego. It's a Division II basketball school. And a lot of my teammates were Christians. So I went to church with them. And I studied the Bible a little bit, but not much. Then it was my sophomore year. I quit basketball. I decided I was going to focus on making rap music. But then after I quit, about a month after I quit, I discovered this theory, the Quadrant Model. And the thesis of the Quadrant Model is that existence expresses itself dominantly through a fourfold pattern, or a 3+1 pattern, which I call the quadrant pattern.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to get into this a little bit. but I have to tell you, as I mentioned off air, I'm trying to understand this. When I look at a lot of it, I just see like a lot of like lists of 4 things. So I'm not trying to be critical. I'm just letting you know kind of like where my head space is at. So if you want to kind of ease us into this, I would appreciate it. So where do you start when you're talking about this?
So it's kind of a complex topic, but the basic idea is that there's a 3+1 pattern, and that's the dominant pattern that you're going to see in existence. So one example of this pattern would be the 4 elements, and I can explain based off of how Aristotle described the 4 elements. Aristotle, in his book, The Physics, he said that the four elements out of which everything is composed are air, water, earth, and fire. And the way that he organized these elements was, he said that air is hot and wet. Hot things rise, wet things fill the container. Water is cold and wet. Cold things sink, and wet things fill the container. Earth is cold and dry. Cold things sink, and dry things maintain a form. They don't fill the container. And then fire is hot and dry. Hot things rise. You see how fire rises? But it's dry in that it doesn't fill the container. It maintains a shape. It maintains a form. Now, when Aristotle articulated these elements, he said that the 4th one, fire, is different than the first 3. He said the first 3 are like one element. But he said fire, it doesn't fit with them. And that's that 3+1 pattern, where the first 3 are very similar, but there's a transcendent quality to the 4th. Aristotle mentioned that there's also possibly, this is later in the physics. At first in his book, The Physics, he only mentions these 4, but later in the physics, he says there may be a 5th, and that's the ether. But the ether, he said, is hot, cold, wet, and dry all at once. So this is very transcendent. I call it ultra transcendent. The 5th has a kind of a divine quality. It is like God, or it is God. This is a super transcendent. Now the 4th is different. It's transcendent, but then the 5th, ultra transcendent, divine. The 5th is so the way that reality is organized is things are organized in these groups of 4 and the 3+1, and then sometimes there's an ultra transcendent 5th. But there's ultimately in the Quadrant Model there's 16 squares, and the way that I like to describe this is there's the 16 particles in existence. Our reality that we know that we interact with is only made up of 4 particles: the up quark, the down quark, the electron, and the electron neutrino. But actually there's 16. So the first 4 are take on that 3+1 pattern, where we have the up quark and down quark. That's like the air and the water. That's a duality. Then we have the electron, which is the doer. That's like the earth one. And then we have the electron neutrino, which is the transcendent 4th one. And what's interesting about the electron neutrino is I heard from physicists that it can transform into any of the first 3 particles. Those are the first 4 particles, and that's all of our existence. All of our existence is made up of those 4. Up quarks and down quarks, different varieties of those make up protons and neutrons. So if you mix up quarks and down quarks together, you get protons and neutrons. So we usually learn in school, in elementary school, that there's 3 particles: the proton, the neutron, and the electron. But actually, protons and neutrons are made up of up quarks and down quarks. And yeah, there's electron, but there's also the electron neutrino that we don't learn about. Then there's another group of 4: the charm quark, the strange quark, the muon, and the muon neutrino. And again, that it's that 3+1 pattern. The first 2 are duality. That's why they sound the same: charm quark and strange quark. That's the water and the air. Then we have the doer is always the 3rd one. The 3rd is always the most physical. The first is the least physical. The first, air, it's kind of ethereal. The second is kind of intermediate between physical and non-physical, like water. The 3rd is always the most physical. It has a quality of being solid. Also, the 3rd tends to have a connotation of being negative, bad. Then the 4th is the transcendent one, the one that doesn't fit. Then we have another group of 4. So those are the first 2 groups of 4. Then the third group of 4 is the top quark, the bottom quark, the tau, and the tau neutrino. Another 3 plus 1. So we have the first 3 groups of 4. But there's another group of 4. So we have 3 groups of 4 that are what are called fermions. So all those particles I just named are called fermions. I'm not an expert, but apparently it has something to do with their spin that makes them called fermions. But there's a final group of 4 that are called bosons. And those are the gluon, the photon, the W boson, and the Z boson. Altogether, that makes 16, 4 groups of 4. And that's the quadrant model. The quadrant model matrix is 4 groups of 4. And I read a book. I skimmed a book by Murray Gell-Mann, the person who described this standard model of particle physics, one of the first people who discovered this. And he wrote, we don't know why these particles are organized in these groups of 4, but they just are. But what I would say to him is, I think I can kind of explain why. I think it's because existence expresses itself through this quadrant pattern. This is a ubiquitous pattern that you're going to see everywhere in reality.
Okay, can I pump the brakes for 1 second and jump in here? Do you mind?
Yep.
Okay, so it seems like a lot of science, but you mentioned air, water, earth, and fire. So here's where I think that I might be able to kind of jump in and maybe add a little bit of perspective. Are you familiar with tarot card work?
It's funny because the person who told me to contact you contacted me on my email. I don't know if you know him, but he contacted me and he told me that he had found a lot of 3 plus 1 patterns in tarot cards, and he sent me links.
Yeah.
Do you know who he is?
No, I don't know who he is. I mean, I don't know if you don't say his name, but maybe if you told me off air, I might know who he is. But yeah, so we've done an extensive amount of tarot card breakdowns and stuff on the show, and I think that maybe this is what he's talking about. If you don't mind me talking about tarot cards here for a second, I think it'll become pretty enlightening for you.
Yeah, I'm interested.
Okay, so the same model that you're talking about, the air, the water, the earth, and the fire. So it's hard to describe this stuff on a podcast, but just think of it as like the cardinal directions. All right, so you got north, west, south, and east. So you're moving clockwise around, or you're moving counterclockwise around the cardinal directions. Okay, so there's this guy. He wrote a book a long time ago. The book is called the Tarot of the Bohemians, and this guy's name was Pappas, and he was obsessed with figuring out the mechanics, not necessarily how to throw the cards down, and he does get into that, but the part that I found fascinating was he explains the mechanics of the cards, how the cards relate to each other, and also how the different arcanas relate to each other. So he starts with the minor arcana. So there's 2 different arcanas in a traditional tarot card deck. You have the minor, which are like the wands, the cups, the swords, and the pentacles. And then you have the major arcana, which are busted down into 3 sets of 7 cards. They're called septenaries. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So we start at the minor arcana. So there's 4 suits. There's the wands, the cups, the swords, and the pentacles. So if you laid them out like we're talking about with the cardinal directions, the wands would go in the air position or the north position. The cups would go in the water position or the west position. The swords would go in the south position or the earth position, and the pentacles would go in the fire position or the eastern position. You got me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it forms a quadrant.
Yeah. We're in a cross situation. Okay. So what Pappas does is he assigns they're not necessarily genders, but he assigns kind of like a role to the different signs. So the air, which is the wands, which would be in the northern position, would be like the male or the kingly suit. And because it's basically like a phallic symbol. You're talking about a wand, right? And then the cups would be the feminine position, because it's basically like like a uteral sort of vulvic sort of thing, vessel. You have this cup. And then the swords would be in the southern position, or the earthly position, because that is he has this whole big thing. It's great. He's talking about like cleaving earth is like cleaving arms off of people and cleaving flesh and all this other kind of stuff. So this would be the combination. The kingly, the queenly would have this knightly sort of position, which would be the sword. And then the pentacle position, which would equate with the fire in your elemental quadrant, would be this transitory place. So it would be like this, it's this transitionary card. So you have the male, the female, the neuter, and then this pentacle or the fire would be the transitory card. You got me?
Yeah.
Okay. So would you like to jump in here, or what? Because I can keep going, because eventually Pappas...
Keep explaining it.
Okay. So eventually Pappas takes, instead of the quadrant, he turns it into a triangle. So the first card, this is when he's discussing the mechanics of the major arcana. So the reason that this all happens is because there's this thing, it's called the Tetragrammaton. It's this 4-letter name of God in Hebrew. It's the Yod, Hey, Vo, Hey. So the Yod would be the kingly position, the first Hey would be the cups, the Vo would be the swords, and the second Hey would be the pentacles. So when he moves into discussing the major arcana, he turns this quadrant into a triangle. So the Yod would be the top, the pinnacle. The Hey would be the, you're traveling the same way around the shape. So it would be like on the left-hand corner. And then the Vo would be on the right-hand corner of the triangle. And the second Hey would now become the middle of the triangle, which is this transitionary feature of the triangle. So that's pretty much, when I was looking at your material and stuff and then listening to you speak about it, like, this is the first thing that I think of, is this Tetragrammaton and this key of understanding tarot cards, which I think is interesting. And I think it's pretty interesting. I think you would agree that that's pretty interesting, because it falls right in line with this quadrant stuff.
There's a tarot card I know that the man's legs make the sign of the number 4. I think it's the Joker one, or
no, that's the Hanged Man. Well, there's actually 2 of them, but the one you're talking about is the Hanged Man.
Yeah, and I also know there's a tarot card spread that's called the Celtic Cross spread. You know about that one?
No, unfortunately, I understand the mechanics and the research behind them, but I don't actually throw cards normally. So I know like the basic 10 card spread, but that anything beyond that is beyond me.
Yeah, I think just from what I know from these, I think that Miss Cleo. Remember Miss Cleo? She used to have the commercials.
Yeah, I remember Miss Cleo.
From what I studied, she used a 4-card spread a lot. That was her primary. So I don't know if I think it relates probably to the 4 elements, and it relates to the Tetragrammaton, because what's interesting is you mentioned the Tetragrammaton and the Kabbalists. They say that everything is a Tetragrammaton. But what's interesting is if you use the word intelligent design, and intelligent design is one way to describe this theory, but it throws a lot of people off, because a lot of people, when they think of intelligent design, they reduce that just to the idea of biology, and thinking that there's a creator God who manufactured or like produced humans But that's really narrowing down this theory, the quadrant theory, because when it's saying that the Tetragrammaton is everything, it's not just biology. I'm talking that this is the main pattern that you're going to see pervading everything everywhere. It's the dominant pattern of reality. So, you mentioned Tetragrammaton. What's fascinating is that the Muslims, they worship Allah, right? Allah is actually also 4 letters. It's ALLH, and the way that they spell it is they put the ALL together and then they separate the H, so it kind of produces that 3 + 1 pattern. And they call it the Tawhid. The saying that they say in order to become a Muslim, you have to say La ilaha illallah, and that's 4 words. And the Ismaili Muslims, they say that those 4 words represent the 4 spokes of the cross. And what's fascinating about that is they argue that, a lot of people think that that the Quran says that Jesus wasn't crucified. But what the Ismaili Muslims say is in the Quran it says, do not say that Jesus died on the cross, he only appeared to die. So the Ismaili Muslims say that Jesus was crucified and he did die, but they say that death is just an appearance. That there is no, so they're mystics. So that's another fascinating example of this quadrant pattern. Now let's look at the Hindus. The Hindus, they say that according to the Vedas, they say that in the Vedas it says that God is the Om, AUM. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, I am the Om. Shiva in the Shiva Mahapuran says, I am the Om. The Om itself, according to the Mandukya Upanishad, which is another Hindu sacred scripture, is called the Fourfold Sound. A lot of people think it's threefold because it has AUM.
Mm-hmm.
But according to the Mandukya Upanishad, there's a silence that follows the M.
Well, it's the way that I've always understood it was that it was the silence surrounding the word. It was the silence before the and after the So that's interesting.
Yeah, and that's a really important thing that you said, actually, because that's the idea of the fourth. The fourth surrounds, it contains, it encompasses the first 3. It has that transcendent quality where if you ever heard of this guy named Ken Wilber, he actually has a book where he mentions what he calls a quadrant model, but it's just a model that he uses to describe reality, but it's different than this. But he describes he talks about holistic models where each next stage goes beyond, but also has aspects of the previous stages, and that's kind of the quality of the fourth. It transcends, but it also contains qualities of the first 3. So one example of that would be the atomic orbitals in chemistry. We have the SPD and then F orbital, and the F orbital kind of transcendent, but it also has kind of the qualities of the first 3. It builds upon and goes beyond, but it also doesn't, leave the first 3, create the fourth. You kind of see what I'm saying with that. It's a holistic model.
Yeah, I got you.
So yeah, it surrounds. The fourth one surrounds, and then and contains the first 3. So then there's also the Hare Krishna. They talk about quadruple. At the beginning, there were quadruple expansions of Krishna, and so one example of the quadruple expansion was Vasudeva, Sankarsana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. And they say that they say that Krishna had 4 aspects, right? What's also interesting is that the Gnostics, they say that at the beginning there was the tetrads, kind of like a quadruple expansion of God. Carl Jung, who was a famous psychologist, he was a transpersonal psychologist like my grandpa, but my grandpa's was kind of different. But Carl Jung talked a lot about archetypes, and he was a student of Freud, but he kind of broke off from Freud because Freud was more materialistic. But Carl Jung saw things more in a spiritual perspective. But he said that God was called by the Gnostics Arbelos. He said Arba, I guess it comes from, I guess it means four. I don't know if it's in Hebrew, but I think it's in Hebrew. Probably it means four. And the word abracadabra, you hear people say abracadabra. A thesis is that comes from the word four, the abra. And it might mean 4 and 1. When you say abracadabra, you're saying 4 and 1.
Learn more at abracast.com. Get bonus content by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.
Okay, have you ever heard of these guys Strauss and Howe? They have this generational theory called the fourth turning. Have you ever heard of this?
Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah, and then what's his name? The person who followed Trump, who was like Trump's right hand man at the beginning of his terms. He was really into that theory. I forget his name now though. You know what I'm talking
about? No. Not often. He fired so many people there at the beginning. It's hard to keep track of it all. So this fourth turning, this has come up on like 3 recent talks that I've done. So it's kind of fresh in my brain. So they have these archetypes for each set of 4 generations, where like the one generation will be a prophet. And then the next generation will kind of be like a nomad, and then there'll be like a hero generation, and then there'll be like an artist generation. So I thought that this was interesting because it kind of flows into your model. And I was just wondering if you had anything to say about it.
That's another example, and they relate again. It's related to the 4 seasons, where they relate those to the spring, summer, fall, and winter. Or they relate to the stages of life: childhood, young adulthood, middle ages, and elderhood. But I just looked up who it was. It was Steve Bannon. Remember?
Oh right, yeah.
He followed that theory. But and then there's the 4 personality types, which is Myers-Briggs. Actually, Carl Jung was kind of the founder of that personality model. But what's interesting is he only had there's different qualities to it and he only used 3, but then Myers and Briggs added the 4th. So again, that's that 3 + 1 pattern. That's a big part of this theory, is that usually there's 3 and then the 4th comes later, or the 4th is just different. So I'll give an example of that. Would be originally biologists thought there were 3 kingdoms of life. They thought it was the animals, the plants, and the fungi. Later, they said that there was a 4th, the protists. Even today, some people question if that's the 4th, but it's pretty much the consensus is that is the 4th. But that's the point. The 4th is always different. And what's interesting about the 4th is you talked about surrounding with the ohm, the 4th part, the silence that surrounds the first 3. What's fascinating about the protists is they call protists plant-like protists, animal-like protists, and fungi-like protists. So it transcends those first three, but it also has the protons have qualities of those first three. You see, another example of that would be a lot of people think that there are three domains of life, but there's actually a fourth. A lot of scientists say that the virus, certain larger viruses, are a separate domain. But what's interesting is, you go to biology class in college and they're going to only teach you three. You even talk to a biology professor, he's going to tell you there's three domains, but they don't know about the fourth. But there's a lot of people who will acknowledge that there's a fourth, but people usually don't know about it because it's a transcendent one. Another big example of that is when I learned about the ossicles in the ear in college. They taught us that there's the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. But then, because I discovered this theory, I thought maybe there's a fourth. I looked it up. I typed into my computer, is there a fourth ossicle? Yes. The lenticular process. People call it the fourth ossicle. The same thing with when I was in my biology class in college. They taught us there's the three germ layers in the embryo: the endoderm, the ectoderm, and the mesoderm. So I thought, okay, there's only three, but because I was studying this pattern, I thought, well, maybe there's a fourth. So I type in my computer, what's the fourth germ layer? It says, go on the Wikipedia article, the neural crest is called the fourth germ layer. Again, it's that fourth that doesn't fit with the first three.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. Yeah. So these are interesting, biology and scientific points, but tell me about how you, I don't know how to word this. Tell me about, it's a story that you wrote, that you talked about with your granddad, where he was talking about the three different personalities, or the four different personalities. And I think this will put like a real nice, like kind of human touch on this transitionary fourth spot. Will you talk about that a little bit?
So what happened was, this was in college. This is my sophomore year of college. I just quit playing basketball about a month prior to this. And I'm talking to my grandpa on the phone. A lot of times I would call my grandpa and we would just talk philosophy, and I would just ask him questions and he would answer my questions. I remember during this topic we were talking about thinking and emotion, and and my grandpa was telling me how thoughts are influenced by your ego, and how your emotions are affected a lot by your ego, and he told me about a personality model that he was studying. Actually, to this day, I don't really know what that model is, but he was studying a personality model where there are four types of people, and he said that there were the thinking type of people, the emotional type of people, the doing type of people, the doers, and the dreamers. And my grandpa told me that he thought that I was a dreamer. And I remember when he told me that, I thought to myself, I think I'm more of a doer, because I thought how I played basketball and I do the rap music, and I was thinking I'm more of a doer than a dreamer. And I was wondering, and to me, when my grandpa told me this, I was thinking that the dreaming this is how I discovered this theory, because I was thinking dreaming doesn't fit with the first three, because dreaming just seems very ethereal, it seems very different. And I questioned, why is there four types and not just three? I thought this model would be fine if it was just thinking people, emotional people, and doers. Why do we need to put the dreamers in there? So then it was about a week later, I was in my dorm, and really during that whole day, I was thinking about the number 3 and number 4. I'm not making this up. Like the whole day I was like walking around thinking number 3, number 4. I remember I was in the line for I forget what restaurant it was, but it's kind of an Asian restaurant. And I think I was like number 4. They gave me number 4, and I thought that was like a synchronicity. And I was thinking I like the number 3 better. So, and then like that whole day I was just thinking about those two numbers. And I was thinking, why is there 4 types and not 3? So then I was in my dorm room later that day, and I was reading the Bible. And this is the first time I ever read the New Testament. I just started reading the New Testament. So I'm reading through it, and then I'm on the chapter where Jesus was crucified. This is not a joke. And actually, what's really cool is the other day I was at my grandma's house, and I found the Bible that I wrote this in. And so I was, I thought that Bible was lost, but I found it. But I was, reading through the Bible, and then I was at the part where Jesus was crucified, and I was thinking, why is it the 4 types, not 3 types? Well, when my grandpa described that personality model, he described it as a quadrant, where there's the 4 types. So I drew in the Bible a quadrant, and I drew the thinking people, emotional people, doers, and dreamers. And I thought to myself, okay, thinking and emotion. Our thoughts affect emotions. Emotions influence thoughts. And I thought, okay, emotions cause us to do things. We do things, and this is influencing our thoughts. So I thought, okay, first we have a duality, and then we have a trinity, a triad. And then I got to the dreaming part, and I thought, okay, dreaming. When we dream, and this was really cool too. I'm really glad I went to this class, because this was probably a lot of things, what's the word, confluence. There's a lot of things that came together here. So I was like, earlier that week, I went to a psychology class where the professor said that when we dream, we're paralyzed. But the only reason why we're paralyzed is so we don't do things. But she was saying that we do things in the dream world, but if we weren't paralyzed, we would act them out in our beds, or we would run around in our sleep. So I was looking at this, and I thought, okay, dreaming. When we dream, we do things. And I thought, okay, and then when we dream, we also think, and we have emotions. So, okay, dreaming is different, but it contains the first 3. Now, also earlier that week, I was watching a physics DVD. And this is cool because this was given to me by my other grandpa. My other grandpa gave me a course on physics by the teaching company. And what I've done actually, which if you look at my Facebook, I've gone online and I've gotten a lot of teaching company DVDs, and I just basically look for quadrant examples, and they're everywhere. But my grandpa gave me a physics course on physics, because I was going to take a physics class. And he thought that maybe, and I asked him, could you give me like a DVD set or something that could maybe help me? So in that physics course, the professor was saying that there's the strong force and the weak force. That's a duality. We see they sound similar, strong and weak. That's like the air and the water, or that's like the up quark and the down quark. And then we have the electromagnetism, and then we have gravity. But the professor said that the first 3 were similar in that they're described through the mathematics of quantum mechanics. The thing about the strong force, again, it's very similar to Aristotle's model, where the strong force describes things that are coming together on a small scale. The weak force describes things that are separating on a small scale. So this is within the nucleus. The electromagnetism, that describes things that are separating on a large scale. Gravity describes things that are coming together on a large scale. So you get those 2 dichotomies, separating or coming together, versus small scale, large scale. And then you're going to get 4 types. And so he said that the first 3 were described only through the mathematics of quantum mechanics. But he said that gravity is described through the mathematics of general relativity. So again, I saw, okay, there's that 3 + 1 pattern. So I was reading through the Bible, and I drew in my Bible the thinking, emotional people, doers, and dreamers. And then I thought, okay, well, that's the same thing as the physics. And then I just started thinking of other examples. And I remember I was thinking of a lot of examples right off the bat. And I knew right off the bat, kind of crazy that I could know it, but I knew I discovered the theory of everything, because I could think of a lot of examples of this. So then the next day, I ride my bike over to my biology class. We're going to have a biology lecture. And at this time, I was in a mystical state, because I was looking at the birds. I could have gone crazy. Like, I'm actually lucky. I'm lucky I didn't go crazy. And actually, I think I did go crazy, because I was following signs. So I'm looking at the birds, and I'm allowing the white bird to tell me where to go versus the black bird. If the white bird's going this way, I'm going to follow the white bird, and it's not the black bird. So I was kind of losing it. But then I go to my biology class, and in the biology class, the professor draws on the board, and we're gonna have a test. We're gonna have the finals coming up soon. So he draws on the board a Punnett square, and he draws a dihybrid cross, where you're gonna get, if the mother and the father come together, and somehow when they come together in the Punnett square, you're gonna get 3 types. There's 3 possibilities that you're going to become, or like let's say if you're a pea plant or whatever, you're going to have 3 possibilities of having a a smooth P, and the fourth possibility you're going to have a rough P. So you're going to see that 3+1 pattern again. That's how the Punnett squares work. So I'm looking at that and I'm like, okay, there's another example. And then I go to and then I went to the bathroom, and that's when I started drawing in a notebook, and I drew the thinking, emotional people, doers, and dreamers. And then I thought to myself, you know what? It's a 16 by, I thought, I don't know how I knew this, but I knew it. I knew it had to be 16 squares. I don't know how, but I knew that it had to be 16 squares because it's a 4x4. So I drew another quadrant below the thinking, emotional people, doers, and dreamers. And in that one, I put contemplation, passion, flowing, and knowing. So the contemplation corresponded to the thinking. The passion corresponds to emotion. The flowing is related to the doing, and the knowing is related to the dreaming. So, and then I drew and then at that point, I didn't know what the other two quadrants should be. Later in that week, I kind of came up with an idea that the first quadrant should be sensation, perception, response, and awareness. That would be the first quadrant, and then the second quadrant would be belief, faith, behavior, belonging. And then the third quadrant, thinking, emotion, doing, dreaming, and the fourth quadrant, contemplation, passion, flowing, knowing. And those related to the 16 personality types of the Myers-Briggs, where the INFJ would be the sensing, the ENFJ would be the perception, and that basically it's a lot to explain. But so I came up with that model. But then after I'm sitting in the bathroom and I'm drawing this out, then I go back into the class, and then we're watching a movie. The teacher put on a movie on Watson and Crick. And then Watson and Crick are discovered the DNA, and they're talking about the 4 nucleobases. It's another example, another interesting example, because in DNA it's cytosine, guanine, thymine, and uracil. But in RNA it's cytosine, guanine, thymine, and what's the fourth one? What do you think?
So,
I forget.
Yeah.
Let me look at that RNA.
Okay. So when earlier when we were talking about intelligent design, and you said that most people just write that
thymine.
off as
It's not uracil, but it's thymine. Yeah. Okay, but yeah, what was that? Sorry.
Okay, so earlier when we were talking about intelligent design, and you said most people write that off or diminish it to just, God creating a human body or whatever. Basically what you're saying is that this quadrant model theory is it's like a Mandelbrot set or something. Like it's a fractal, like its fingerprints is everywhere, from, up quarks and down quarks all the way to, gravity in the universe, right?
Yep, exactly. And not just in science, because we're looking at religion, we're looking at art. Like the stuff in art would really blow your mind. That a lot of these, really famous paintings, like Manet's Luncheon in the Grass. We have 4 characters who are in the front, and then we have the 4th guy sitting in the back, and that's that 3+1 pattern. And you're going to see that expressed everywhere throughout the history of art. So Manet, he got into inspiration to draw that one from Titian's artwork. I'm trying to, where he also draws 3 people in the front and then the 4th person in the background. I forget the name of that artwork. But anyways, you're going to see this pattern everywhere. And then you look at music, and then, for instance, like Beethoven, his famous Fifth Symphony. It's a 4-note. Da, 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 da. So it's a 4-note motif that kind of is spread throughout the whole work. And he claims that when he wrote that, it was through inspiration from God. He got that from inspiration by God. I would say, yeah, well, I mean, he basically is just doing that 3+1 pattern over and over again.
Yeah, so that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because I know that you're being a rapper, you're a musician. Like, do you see this, or obviously you're going to see it, but how do you see it expressed in like music, like the 4x4, like rhythms and this kind of stuff? Is there a deeper way that you should be looking at it?
Yeah, so in rap music, they go by the 16 bars, which is a 4x4, 4 times 4. And then originally the symphony, so music kind of starts off with the music history with the symphony, and those were divided into 4 parts. Originally, I think there were 3 parts, and then they moved to 4. So like Mozart symphonies, they usually had 4 movements. And then, for instance, a symphony usually has 4 groups, which would be the woodwinds, the brass, the percussions, and then the strings. And even if you like look at just the strings in and of themselves, there's the violin, the viola, the cello, and the double bass. I think the violin has 4 strings, and a lot of them they have like 4. The strings are in 4 units, like even with the guitar.
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly how to describe that, but also like the horns. There's the flugelhorn has a lot of horns have 3 valves, but the flugelhorn has a transcendent 4th valve. So yeah, it's like the Renaissance guitar has 4 courses of strings. There's the ukulele has 4 courses of strings. And then, even if you just look at, for instance, Brahms, he's known for his 4 symphonies. What was that guy's name who did the ring cycle? Wagner. His famous ring cycle is divided into 4 parts. The Rheingold, the Valkyrie, the Siegfried, and the Twilight of the Gods. That's the transcendent 4th part.
Yeah, man, this is all super interesting to me. I guess that I would have thought that the world was created on a triangle, like it would be created on 3 sides, but you've kind of introduced this idea of this transitory situation or position to me. And like I said, I've read about it like in Pappas's Tarot of the Bohemians, but never really expanded it. So like when you talk about something easy, like humor in a movie, or like how jokes should repeat themselves 3 times, like what would the 4th beat of that be? Like the moving on to another set of 3 jokes, I guess.
What's really cool is if you look at a lot of like what I've done is I watch movies and I'm looking for the fourfold, and it has to be some sort of conspiracy going on, honestly, because when you watch these movies, it's dominant. They mention the fourfold, and the fourfold is you see it everywhere. That can't be a coincidence. Now you could say it's a conspiracy, but I don't even know if it's conspiracy. It doesn't have to be conscious. This could be some sort of divine supernatural thing. At this point, it's difficult to say exactly what's going on.
Well, the way that I would think about it is if it's ingrained to the nature of the universe, then it happens organically, right? So Tool, I'm sure you've heard of this band, progressive heavy metal rock band Tool, whatever. Like 2 albums ago, they wrote a Fibonacci sequence into a song, and everyone thought it was brilliant. Like this complex time changes that like spun into like the way the music, like there's YouTube videos that break it down or whatever. And I'm not very musical, so it's all above me. I just know that I like the songs or whatever. But the singer was on Joe Rogan like a year or 2 ago or whatever, and Rogan was asking him about it. And he goes, yeah, it's there. He was like, but me writing it into the music is like a dick joke because it's there anyways. Like I just effed it up and kind of like made it obvious to, so like if there is this quadrant model, then I don't think it has to be a conspiracy. I don't think that people have to do it on they don't even have to be aware that they're doing it. Like it's just intrinsically built into what they're doing.
And you know how I know that's possible? Because when I wrote my rap music, and this is a long story, but my original raps ended up being thrown away, but I have fragments that I typed on my computer that are full of errors. But what I didn't know at the time, but when I looked back over them, they were filled with 4s. And when I was writing them, I know I wasn't aware of that. So that's one way that I know that it could happen organically.
Yeah,
but
that's interesting. I want to grab a bunch of my books that I've written. I want to go through them now and find all the 4s in there.
Yeah, and you mentioned jokes, and what's the most famous joke?
It's the knock-knock joke.
Well, the most famous joke is, why did the chicken cross the road?
Okay.
And you see within that joke the word cross, because that's what it is all about, the cross. You're going to see that everywhere. So
Nice.
that's one way that I look at it through comedy. I actually watched a whole course on comedy just to see how it related to the quadrant model, and I remember the guy talked a lot about it, like did different 4s. I just can't recall them right now, but he mentioned how there's some things in regards to comedy that were related to the pattern. I just can't really remember what they were.
Yeah.
But you mentioned just to go back to music though really quick is you look at a lot of groups tend to take on that 3+1 pattern. So for instance, the Beatles, they have George Harrison, who's kind of like the 4th one that was kind of different. And even like Destiny's Child, they originally had 4 members, but then the 4th one left and they became 3 members.
So think of the Beatles, like one of their big songs is "Come Together," where they say 1 and 1 and 1 make 3, but there's 4 of them.
Well, there's 4 of them, yeah, and they take on that 3+1 pattern too. Even in their album artwork, on one of the album covers, they put 3 of them on one line, and then the 4th one was separate from them, right? And then what's cool too is, George Harrison, they got into the whole Hare Krishna movement, and what the whole Hare Krishna movement, their main thing is the Hare Krishna Maha-Mantra, and the Maha-Mantra goes Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and that's a 4x4 matrix because it's 16 words. And the way they even draw it, in their temples is as a 4x4 matrix. And they say that mantra is God. They say that they say that's the most divine mantra, and they say that is God, that mantra. And I say, yeah, that's the quadrant model, what you're saying.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah, man, that's interesting. So, okay, well, would you like to say anything any additional parting words before we wrap it up, or?
I would just say, look up quadrantmodelofreality.com and go to my Facebook page and go to Merk Diesel Books. You're going to see a lot of information. I have books on music, how it relates to music, how it relates to painting, how it relates to biology, how it relates to every subject that there is, pretty much. Although I could even make more. I'll try to make one on comedy now, and then just go through all that. And then also have another website, quadrantmodel.com. It's not as organized, and I have to, even like you said, I have to organize my stuff. It's just I'm doing so much research that organization to me, I'm just more into the research right now. And then also I've been writing books. Right now I'm trying to find publishers, if anybody can contact me to help get books published. And it'd probably be helpful for me to get an agent, because I need somebody who can organize and do all that stuff.
Yeah. As far as your website's concerned, there's a lot of information in there. There's just no context to it. So I think that's why I was having such a hard time wrapping my brain around all the information that's on there. But I mean, it's interesting, puzzle to sift through. So thank you, Ryan, for being on here. I really, at first, I kind of was like, in all truthfulness, I thought that I could chalk this up to pareidolia or apophenia, just mankind's struggle to find patterns. But I think that you really might be onto something here.
Yeah, and you have really, once you go through the stuff, you're really gonna see that it's not apophenia. This is something that's serious stuff. So,
all right, man. Thank you so much for your time, dude. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. I appreciate that, man. Hey, what was the word though? Apofina?
Yeah.
Is that what it's called?
Well, there's two that are kind of the same. It's pareidolia, which is people that find patterns everywhere. This is like that Jim Carrey movie 23, where he starts looking at 23 and there's 23s everywhere. And then there's one that's closer related. It's called apophenia. It's APOPHENIA. And that's where you see relationships and connections between everything. So the way that I think of this is like the conspiracy theorists with the chalkboard and all the lines going everywhere is kind of like that kind of character.
Like David Icke, like drawing a line here, connecting to here, and it's like squiggling everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that. It's like that. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia meme with Charlie Day and like all the big map and stuff behind him, and he's freaking out. Like that's the kind of thing that I always think about.
Yeah, I've heard of apophenia, and I heard of those. I just forgot the names, but yeah, apophenia, pareidolia. I have to remember those names. But
yeah, all right, man. Thanks again. I appreciate it.
Hey, sounds great, John. It was a good interview, and
all right,
I enjoyed it.
All right, thanks a lot, bro.
Thanks, bro. Peace.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review.
Hey, did you learn something? Did you laugh? Supporting me is a way for you to be a part of the Abercast and ensure its growth and sustainability. It also means I can create a normal schedule for shows and bonus shows, as well as the exclusive Fellowcraft episodes. By supporting the show, you are not only a listener, but you are a part of the show. You supporting the show gives me a way to offer fun rewards as a thank you for showing your appreciation and support for our projects. Do you have an idea for a reward that you don't see? Let me know. My supporters are my partners. I currently pay for you to listen to the Abercast. Not only do I pay the hosting bills out of my own pocket, I volunteer my time and talent to each and every episode of the Abercast. The price of books, the time and resources of reading and researching, the massive amounts of gin and tonic needed, the equipment it takes to record the shows, the time and resources it takes to create the bonus material, and the cost to maintain the internet presence. Is it worth your support? I don't know. I'm proud of the Abercast, and I feel like I'm improving all the time. In addition to creating the show that you dig and that you are excited about, I also have a full-time commitment and other obligations. So why financial support? All of the supporters help me focus my time on the quality and development of the podcast. And what if you can't afford, $1 or $3 or $10 or whatever a month? Believe me, I get that. There are many degrees of support, but if you can't support the show financially, please consider leaving a 5-star rate and review on your preferred podcast app. And don't forget that you could sign into the mailing list and still unlock a lot of bonus content. Thank you. I cannot put into words how much it means to me that you listen to the show each time I post a new episode. Your feedback, support, and love of the stories that we talk about here is what keeps me going.